Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Right for Your Life. I'm Caleb.
And I'm Timothy.
Hopefully, we sound different this week, and that is because I learned that my microphone has been backwards for the past several episodes.
Yeah, and I've got my new setup actually as well. I realized that I was using my old microphone when my wife's microphone is actually significantly better, has a shock mount, and I had a pop filter buried under a bunch of stuff in my closet. So we're both far more official than we were, especially last week, and definitely the weeks beforehand.
If there has been nothing else from this experience, we still have a lot to learn about this and about writing and about literally any other creative endeavor.
Yeah. And about audio apparently, because I I should have realized that Caleb's mic was backwards, but it sounded so much better compared to his old microphones that I was like, "Oh, this is perfect. I have no notes. It sounds so much better."
Yeah, the biggest problem was the fact that I was not super satisfied with the way that I was sounding, so I started Googling things, and the first thing that I saw was a picture of my actual microphone somewhere, and it has a little knob on it that gives it a little bit of volume, and in every picture that I was seeing, it was facing towards me, and I always had it facing away from me, and I was like, "Oh no. Oh no. I know this microphone only works well if it's facing towards the thing making the noise."
It's such a crushing way to realize your mistake through essentially Google Images.
I think that another thing is I this connects back to last week where we talk about pride and being humble and me just being like, okay, I need to have the humility to admit that I have just done this backwards, and that's okay. We live and learn.
Yeah, now I'm checking my mic to make sure that it is also pointing forwards. I believe it is. Yeah.
Gosh, I certainly hope so. If both of us have had backwards facing microphones this entire time,
Uh
I would say there would be consequences. The consequences are we have just sounded much worse than we have had to for much longer than we needed to.
but like we were saying off air before we started recording, I mean if on our 1000th episode, this will be less than 1% of our total time. It might even be yeah, about 1%. So, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter a whole ton. And, if you started on the 1000th episode and you're coming back and listening to the first few episodes, I mean, glad that you're listening through the backlog. It's going to take you probably a few years at least, but this is what we used to be like. And obviously, we're so much better in the future.
That's the goal. No guarantees, but
Maybe we're just infinitely worse. It's all downhill from here.
man, well, we started out on episode 1 saying it has to go up. It literally has to. We don't have a choice. Now that there's room to fall back down, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, we have gone up a significant amount in a number of things since episode 1. And so, I mean, maybe episode 10 is the best episode we put out, and then it's just mid after that.
And episode 10 is going to be a special episode.
Ooh.
Yep, foreshadowing Ghost. It'll be a special episode for a variety of different reasons, some of which we will keep a secret for now, but for other reasons, just being it will have been 10 weeks of this, which is very exciting for me. I mean, you're talking a fifth of the year that we've spent, putting something out every week. And by the time that the actual time that we're recording this, it's really only been 5 weeks, maybe week six, the start of week six, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I would start a week 6, I think.
So that means that a lot of the work that we have put in now will have paid off by that point. And I am very thankful for everyone who is listening, has listened, and will listen in the future.
Yeah, and especially for the people who have been telling us what they think about it, whether it's been encouraging you or whether you have thoughts on how it could improve or suggestions on things we could read, anything like that. It's nice to know that people are not indifferent.
The void is actually speaking back.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool.
That it is. And I would say that it's almost comforting.
Oh, he did the thing! Absolutely incredible. This is you top 10 podcast hosts, clearly.
I mean, look, we'll accept our award when it comes to us. Just mail it.
But yes, you're absolutely correct.
I think we've preambled enough. I think it's time to amble.
Let's amble.
All right. See you on the other side. Comfort like thunder. My chest loosens as a low rumble gently shakes the earth and bright flashes of light scream across the sky. Shortly after, a few drops of rain begin to hit the metal roof above me. They ping softly at first before settling into a dull roar. The overwhelming noise of the rain, thunder, and lightning wash over me. My mind can't think, and that is a blessing. Even if I could, why would I think while feeling this act of nature? The ditch outside my house turns into a small river carrying the sticks and leaves that have been jostled free from the trees by the heavy rains. Much to my dismay, a car rushes past, blinding me with its lights and replacing the petrichor with burning gasoline. Shortly after it rolls past, the earth covers its tracks and returns me to my peace. Why must this noise calm me so? The wind sweeps itself into a fury as the storm continues to roll. Branches begin to fall and smack against anything close. A few garbage cans roll down my neighbor's driveway, spilling some of their contents, which promptly get carried away by the wind. Another slight annoyance swept away in the rushing chaos. The world swirls and twists as the tempest carries on, unbothered by us or anything else in its path. Why would anyone want to stand in its way is beyond me. A few more calming moments of this dark and destructive downfall tear through my corner of the world. Like all things do, it ends, abrupt and calloused. The sun rips through the meager clouds that can't keep up with the rest of the storm. As the light hits me, my chest begins to tighten as my brain roars back to life. The momentary silence is torn away like it was never here. Why does the calm unsettle me? So, what did you think?
Well, the first thing that struck me is the way you read it feels very contemplative, I guess. It feels like, this is happening in the moment, and maybe you're sitting on the porch or something like that, and you're just describing what's happening. And then when I had that thought, the second thing that occurred to me is unlike basically every other single story that we've read, I just assumed the I in the story was you. I don't think I've done that before, and I thought that was interesting, and I'm not exactly sure why I thought that or if that was your intent. But I think it's interesting that I just assumed that it was just Caleb. But I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I think the reason that happened is because it just feels so normal and like real life. Because it just really it transported me to that exact scenario. And I know we were talking last week about painting a visual picture that then engages all of your senses. And I think this is another fantastic example of that because I mean you do hit essentially every single sense except for potentially touch. It feels exactly like that actual experience feels. And I think because it just felt so natural, it felt like I could be there. And so it just felt like you could be there. It it was just this is a thing that's happening. You painted a mental picture and I got transported to that point.
Yeah, this is one of those things that because it is so mundane, because it is so normal,
Hmm.
it makes it very easy to associate yourself with what is happening. Everyone knows the feeling of a strong storm rolling through. And so being able to sort of paint the corners of what that looks like, everyone can use their imagination to fill in any pieces that are missing. And I know very distinctly the sound of rain on a tin roof. I know very distinctly, the sound of garbage cans being knocked over by the wind and cars driving through rain and all of these other images that I present to you. They all feel so familiar and not necessarily intimate, but just easily understandable.
Mm, yeah. When you were writing this, were you conjuring these memories and images just over so many experiences of having a thunderstorm like this, or was it a specific storm that you then went and wrote about?
I think that it's a combination of a bunch of them because it might have been raining here as well when it was happening because it's been a very wet summer up here. I used to not appreciate a storm, but I do now. I love listening to the sound of the rain and the thunder and all of these other things. And I do find it to be strangely comforting in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to take that feeling and sort of put it into words.
I think you did a very impressive job with that. It's very interesting how you can use what I assume are similar techniques to something like last week's story and paint something so opposite in terms of the emotion that it results in. Because last week, very disturbing, very dark, very unsettling. And then this one, it puts me in that mood. Like it's not just oh I can picture it. I am feeling the way that I would feel when that thunderstorm is happening. Are you using any different techniques or methods, or is it just the same method as what you wrote last week, just applied in a different way?
I want to say a little bit of both because it's very different when you're describing something that everybody knows versus when you're describing something that is essentially brand new.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a difference between translating an experience that everybody has had versus creating an experience that everyone will share.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, for example, when you are describing background noise and you say that someone is cracking open a can of Coke, everyone knows what that looks like, feels like, and sounds like.
Yeah.
And so you have to go one of two ways. You either have to be very, very descriptive about the particularities of it, of like, does it overflow? Does it not overflow? Does the tab actually work correctly? What is the can? Is it regular? Is it diet? Is it zero? Is it cherry? Is it vanilla? Or you can just say that someone is cracking open a can of Coke, or I can hear it in the background. Like I hear someone cracking open a can of Coke, and you're like, okay, I get it. I sort of know the setting. I kind of know where we're at. But the thing that is the same is still telling the audience what you want them to know. But the pieces that you may want them to know are different. So something like last week, I used a lot of big details to describe the scene that is happening. And in this week, I used a lot of little details, such as the rain starting out softly and then getting heavier, and the fact that the roof is made of tin, and the garbage cans are rolling down the driveway and then get knocked over, and using smaller pieces to fill in the images because if you're standing on your porch, you sort of understand what the entirety of what is around you is happening. And so I don't have to describe the big thing. I can describe the small things that will more closely paint the thing I want you to see.
Yeah. That's actually very similar to I am not a painter, but my wife is and she explains things to me. So if I get it wrong, I'm sorry. But it's very very similar to how I understand painting works, especially something more like impressionism, where you're not painting every tiny little detail in exact realism. You are creating the broad brushstrokes and you're adding the little details you want the brain to focus on, and then you're trusting your viewer in this case, I suppose, to fill in the rest of the details themselves. Because we do have all those shared experiences. And so if you see something that vaguely resembles an apple in an apple like scenario, your brain will see it as an apple, regardless of whether it's, perfectly realistic apple or if it's three brush strokes that resemble an apple. And I think you're doing a very similar thing, which is why it's interesting that we've been talking about painting a mental picture because you're basically using the same techniques just with words in this case. You're giving very broad brushstrokes of setting the scene, and then you add the little details here and there to make it feel real. Even though you're not describing in painful detail every single thing about what's happening.
Right. And it's all about what you want the audience to experience. Because when you're writing a mystery book, you're sort of like a magician where look over here, look at the thing I want you to look at. Don't pay attention to the things I don't want you to look at. But when you are not writing something like that, you're more of a, like you said, you're more of a painter where you're like, look at the things I want you to look at.
That is an interesting distinction, but it's that's exactly how it is. Yeah, because writing the mystery book, it's always about the misdirection. And, ooh, look at this thing instead of the thing that am including, but that I don't want you to focus on. But then something like this is here's the specific things I want you to focus on so that you feel the way that I want you to feel.
Correct.
So to get away from the mechanics of it and a little more to you writing it, I think it's neat that every single paragraph ends with a question. The last question, why does the calm unsettle me? What does that mean when you write it in the at the end of that paragraph?
I think for me and a lot of other people, there is a certain amount of unpleasantness that comes with silence,
Mhm.
in which the thing that replaces the silence is the noise of one's own head.
Yeah.
And I find that a storm is a good excuse to not do anything. Because it's raining outside. It's bad weather. Like we shouldn't go and we shouldn't do. And the sound of a storm is so loud that it doesn't leave you any room to think. And when your brain runs at 1,000 miles an hour, not thinking is a blessing. The quiet bothers me so because not because it is quiet, but because of what goes on in my head when it is quiet.
Yeah. I think you really bring that feeling to life as well. Not just the scene of what's happening, but what you're experiencing through that, especially in those last couple sentences. Specifically the phrase my chest begins to tighten as my brain roars back to life. That is so accurate as to how that feels because you get this momentary respite where without you having to work at it, your brain is calmed. It's quiet. All you're doing is taking in, and you're not having to process. You're not having to do any of these other things. And then it stops, and then it's back to normal. And that fleeting moment of peace is gone. I think you did a very good job eliciting that feeling as well as just the feeling of the thunderstorm.
Yeah, it's the sort of dichotomy of peace under chaos and chaos under peace.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you listeners slash the one reader slash the one viewer who aren't calmed by thunderstorms, try sitting on a front porch, and you don't have to worry about the lightning hitting you or anything like that. Do it at a time when there's not a tornado warning or anything like that. A safe, calm thunderstorm, and just let yourself sit there and see what happens. I understand it's not for everybody. I used to be absolutely terrified by thunderstorms when I was a kid, but there is something truly special about that experience, I think.
It 100% is. And I think it's I don't know. I'm gonna let people fill in why for them. So
Yeah.
if you are calmed by thunderstorms, put why in the comments below. And if you are not calmed by thunderstorms, put why in the comments below. I would love to I would love to read about those things either way.
Yeah.
So I think that about I think that about puts a bow on this writing, unless you had more questions.
No, I mean, the only other thing that I actually so I've read this one a lot. I've always enjoyed it. The only other thing that I realized, okay, actually, two things. I do want to mention that I had to Google what petrichor was. Um,
Mhm,
and I had to Google it as we were listening to it this morning, even though I've listened to this recording, I think thrice now, and I've also
mhm.
read it quite a few times beforehand. It never occurred to me that I didn't know what that word was, but it's a very descriptive word, and I like it. And if you, the listener, do not know what it is, Go Google it. I will not spoil it for you.
I chose that word specifically because it is so distinct and it is so descriptive.
And it feels it just the word itself. I think I didn't Google it because I got the feeling from it regardless. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I was like, oh, I understand the feeling that this word gives me. And it's one of those words where it's not an onomatopoeia, but it's like that, but with feeling, where the word sounds like how it feels, you know?
Yep.
But the other thing I noticed was, and I can't believe I didn't mention this earlier because I love parallelism and structure and things like that. And the way you ended every paragraph with a question, and the first and third, well, the first and third kind of are parallel, but the second and fourth questions especially, they mirror each other so well, and you do a really good job of using the questions to kind of show the arc of this little experience. And I don't really have anything more than that. I just love it when anybody does some writes like this, and there is that structure and that kind of order and parallelism to it. I've always appreciated that.
I'm glad I could bring a little satisfaction.
All right, I think that's all I had.
Sweet. I like this piece because I find it to be not necessarily more relatable, but more easily relatable. There's a lot less smoke and mirrors going on here. It feels a little more real and raw than a lot of the other stuff that I write, and not in like a emotional outpouring sort of way, but more of like a deep and brief glimpse.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to say it.
So, what has been inspiring you this week?
Well, obviously, since we're still getting up the backlog, it hasn't been too many days since the last time we recorded. But in between that time and this time, I watched a movie, and the movie was Support Your Local Sheriff. It is from, I believe, 1967 or 1969.
Whoa,
Um,
throwback.
so it's in color because I think color was a 50s thing, I want to say. Not great on movie history, but it's a western as you can imagine. And the opening of the movie is this town that has had a gold rush, and it's very wild as western towns tend to be. um and then this guy comes in, and he becomes the sheriff. And I won't spoil too much more than that, but basically the whole movie is him trying to be the sheriff in this town. There's a lot of the classic western things in it. It's exactly the kind of town you think it is. The bad guys are exactly the kind of bad guys you think they are. All of this stuff. But the thing that always strikes me with this movie, and the thing that sets it apart from a lot of the other westerns of that era, is the simplicity and depth of both the storytelling and the characters. I think a lot of older movies, especially the ones that have lasted, do a really good job with characterization. I don't know why that's changed. I don't know why it feels like characters are crafted now and they were just people then. But that's kind of what it feels like, at least a lot of the time to me. These characters, they just feel like people. And even the bad guys, again, not to spoil too much, but the characterization of the bad guys is so good. There's one line, and I don't think this is spoiling anything. If you really don't want to be spoiled by anything, you want to go watch this movie, skip ahead a couple minutes. But there's one line where the sheriff is talking about kind of the main bad guy, who's an older gentleman, owns a ranch, etc., all that classic stuff. And he says that the bad guy, he says that he seems like quite a lonely man. And that's such great storytelling and character building, because you get scenes with the bad guys and they're talking, and it just puts such a unique spin on it where you see, yeah, he is. And you don't necessarily feel sympathy for him, but it makes him come alive in such a special way. And the other characters, you get to see not just what they're doing, but how they feel. And it's not tell, don't show. Nobody's going on expositing about their emotions and having this huge monologue or anything. But if you pay attention to it, everybody in that story is just a normal human. and they're all just trying to make it work. And I think that's really special. It's a fantastic movie. Definitely go watch it. I think it's free on Prime right now if you have Prime. Not to sponsor them or anything, cuz but it's probably available there. If you can find it on DVD, get it on DVD. It, watching movies on DVDs is such a better experience. Anyway, it's also just a funny movie. It's not jokey. They're not quipping constantly. It's situational humor and, character clashing humor and stuff like that. Very well written, very well filmed. I'm trying to remember who the main actor is. I should know his name. Hang on, let me Google it real quick.
Is it the same guy that's in every Western?
No, it is very different. Oh, James Garner, that's who it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So obviously, if you're a fan of James Garner, I mean, he is very attractive in this movie. You know, showing a little bit of chest hair the whole time. He's got like a little 5 o'clock shadow. He's in the cowboy gear. It's a good time. But yeah, fantastic movie and just really a great example and a great inspiration of good characterization that doesn't feel forced. It just feels natural.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay any of the like older movies directors or directing or any of the writers or different things like that, but that feeling that you said of like their people versus their crafted is every decision, every movie is like explicitly handcrafted to a painful degree in a lot of movies, especially now where
Mm-hmm.
people can't just be characters in movies. They have to be that person all of the time, or they're that person for, a decade or a decade and a half. So everything matters. Everything they say matters, everything they do matters. And I feel like you see it in a lot of indie films where it's like, we're figuring out this character, we're figuring out this thing. There's a little more wiggle room, there's a little more room to play. Decisions are still explicit and specific, but there's not a large level of oversight over all of these decisions that get made. And so characters sort of have the ability to breathe a little more, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, in those instances.
Yeah, it's like because the character isn't being every line, every facial expression isn't being explicitly crafted, then the actor gets to make those creative decisions on the fly based on what's happening around them, based on how they perceive the scene going. And you just get a little more humanness to that portrayal than you might with something that's so incredibly scripted.
Yeah, and I am sure like 100% the people who were making movies back in the 50s and 60s, they were making a lot of these same decisions, right, about how do I want them to feel, how do I want them to a lot of the similar decisions that were made then are made now. The difference is
Hmm.
the game is always different when it is not solved yet.
Yeah.
And the more sort of history that you have, the harder it is to not be sort of excruciatingly controlling, especially in a world now where like this sells, this doesn't sell, this works, this doesn't work. But when you're back in the 50s and 60s, you're still exploring more of this, right? Like it's the early days of color television. It's some of these other things, right? I'm sure is this early Western period or is this like peak Western period?
Hmm. I don't know, because a lot of, in my mind, a lot of the classic westerns are still black and white. Obviously you've got some of 'em like 510 to Yuma and stuff like that that are more recent, a lot more recent, and what I would still consider great western films. I think this is, I don't know actually. Let me. When was the
Because I also know there's like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that's a one of the traditional classic Western films with Clint Eastwood in it, and that's in color.
yeah.
But it's definitely later in that period.
Yeah, so it's probably on the tail end. The late 60s is going to be on the tail end of that, I think.
Yeah,
Um because the kind of the golden age of the westerns apparently. This is just some very brief research from the 50s to the 60s. So that's where you
Mhm.
got a lot of like the, you know, John Wayne, Roy Rogers, Gene Autry type movies.
Right.
And then you get more into the spaghetti western era, which is where you get the more anti-hero stuff and a lot of the classic soundtracks and the, you know, doo 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 and all that stuff.
Yep.
That's later 60s. So this is kind of in that later era where everything's becoming a little more complex, a little more maybe anti-hero-ish. Not really, because that term has kind of lost a lot of meaning. But, you know, a lot of like the spaghetti westerns that we know and love, I think come from that later era as well.
And it may be in this case that this movie may wind up benefiting from the fact that it's coming later in that era. Again, talking about like the solved game. It is definitely more solved than the earlier ones. They're still, obviously
Hmm.
not as like a lot of the learning that we've done even since then has gone on. But maybe it's the fact that in this one they're trying to make a Western that has a lot of the tropes but feels different
Yeah, yeah,
because westerns have been made over and over and over and over and over again. They're like, okay, well, let's sort of draw back. Maybe let's dial down. Maybe let's be a little more character driven in this one and not so much spectacle driven
yeah.
as maybe some other ones in this time are when you're getting to the end of a period. It's like superhero movies, right? The beginning superhero movies versus the end superhero movies. They're going to look different and feel different.
Yeah. And I think you get another advantage from having that amount of history of Western films is you don't have to spend as much time introducing as many things because at that point everybody knows what a Western film is like. So you don't have to spend time introducing how the world works because unless you're changing something about how the world of this movie works, you could just assume it's like every other Western. You know, you shoot somebody's hat, it flies off. There's always a, you know, a moment, high noon in the street. You've got the tavern, the bar, whatever you want to call it. You've got all of these classic things and you don't have to spend time explaining any of that because we just understand. So you can immediately jump into here's the characters in this setting. And I think the same thing, I mean, superhero movies is another great example where the earliest superhero movies, and again, that was a long time ago, the earliest superhero movies. And of course, they had the benefit of being based on comics, which again helps. You don't have to explain everything. But at this point, compared to the earlier movies, we already know how, like as an audience we already know, okay, this is how superheroes work. You know, you're not having to explain superheroes to a new group of people at this point, and that can be a blessing and a curse. And I think you kind of get that middle ground where you've done a lot of, as a, you know, as an industry, you've done a lot of the building, the groundwork for it, and then you can get to the point where you're just making excellent movies that have good characterization, that have great plot, all this stuff, because you're focusing on what matters. But then, like you said, near the end, you start drifting towards pure spectacle. And I think that's when it declines a lot.
Yeah, because particularly with the superhero genre, we're approaching year 18 of
Oh,
this
goodness.
superhero renaissance, right? Like it was 2008, I think, is when Iron Man came out, and the first Hulk movie that they
Wow.
don't talk about comes out. Yeah, and you see that in that parallel to today, right? Where there are some movies that are very spectacle, and then there are other movies that sort of bring it back down and around. I think of Superman that came out last year, where
Yes.
it it kind of returns back to ground zero again, and again, it focuses on characterization. We don't have to introduce who Superman is. We don't have to introduce who all of these other people are. It's like watching a modern day Batman film. It's like they're just going to skip. In Robert Pattinson's Batman, they sort of skip all of Christian Bale's first movie Batman. They're just like,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 you know all this. Whatever. We're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that can sort of lend to, again, focusing on different things. Again, it goes back to the writing for today. When you go back to the shared experience, you can say and do fewer big things and focus on more small things because the experience is common to more people.
Yeah. Because there's already a cultural awareness of this story or this character or something like that, you paint the super broad brushes, and then you focus on either the things you want to change or the specific things you want the audience to focus on, a specific aspect or something like that. Well, what's been inspiring you this week?
So to build off of what you said earlier where in the film the villain looks very lonely, the thing that's been inspiring me this week is Friends.
That is an interesting segue. Go on.
Tim and I play in a D&D group together, and we played very late on a Friday night. And we had a like 2.5 to 3 hour pre-session before the session started because of various scheduling conflicts that I'm not going to get into here. It's Tim's fault. It is very interesting because we started out playing brand new characters for this little pre-session that we did, in which you essentially had 7 things about your character, painting in very broad brushstrokes, where you essentially had a name, a physical description, and then 4 things that you're good at, 2 things that you're bad at. And that, again, painting very broad brushstrokes of these things. And so we all chose to be very vivid and descriptive in these really big things while not really talking about a lot of the small things. But what's inspiring me about that and really about playing D&D is sort of that connection that you get with people in a group of other storytellers, because frankly everyone that we play with is a talented storyteller in their own right. Our DM is another author, and I write, and Tim writes, and we have another friend who knows a lot about history and does a lot of lore and world building and other D&D campaigns that he runs that are also very vivid and descriptive. And we have another friend that she is doing more storytelling and writing in a different venue. And so it's always very inspiring when you get together with these other people who want to also tell a deep, rich story together. We're not trying to write our own individual pieces. We're kind of coming together to collaborate and work on this really big piece together. And that lends to different ways of speaking and thinking and problem solving that you would not have found on your own.
Yeah.
And it's a treat and a blessing every time we get together.
Well, I think it's interesting. We were also talking about just now about having a history of stories and a history of genre and stuff like that. And I think it's also really neat that because all of us, we have different focuses of, what we consume and what we put out and stuff. I'm not going to dox anybody's name, but the person who played Log has watched so many like specific TV shows and things that a lot of the rest of us haven't necessarily watched, that he brings in such a different perspective of how to do a character. I'm going for, deep characterization. You're definitely going for more horror vibe type stuff. Other people are doing various things. We all have our typecast. And I think that's really fascinating because of what we take in, what we prefer, and what we output. The stories that we get are such a blend of all of these things that there's no way any one of us could write any of the stories that happen, because we're pulling from so many different genres that one of us or two of us have a lot of knowledge in.
And it's just so amazing that we have been playing after the preamble, we get into the amble as we were doing now. And we have been playing together for a very long time. So now we can focus more on the small aspects of our characters. We open up every session with dad facts, which are just facts that we give about our characters. That was inspired by the show Dungeons and Daddies, a different D&D podcast. I say a different D&D podcast, like we're a podcast. A different podcast that is D&D based, where they give very small facts about their characters that you're not going to run into otherwise. And so it brings our characters more to life. And then since we've been playing together so long, we don't have to focus on exactly what our character is doing at all times. And oftentimes we can even fill in what the other person is probably doing. If someone's like, I don't really know what my character is doing right now. Someone can probably step in and go, "You're probably doing blank. You're probably doing this thing."
Yeah. And it's also really special that because we've had so much time, especially with the characters we're playing right now in this campaign. Again, it's again it all comes back to the same ideas that we understand everybody else's characters so well at this point that we don't have to say, "Ooh, my character is feeling this," or "This is how my character reacts to that." We can express those things in either what the character is saying or heck, even in our facial expressions as we're role playing. And we all understand what's going on because we know these characters so well. We have the baseline of, I think for this campaign, 4 years of character development. And so we can focus on the little minutia of, oh, this specifically is the twist on how my character is feeling about this, as opposed to having to spell it out every single time. And, again, it's just the history of what you get over time and how you're able to use that to craft more nuanced and more specific stories.
Man, there's been a lot of story craft in this one, and I love it so much.
Oh yeah.
I nerd out about this. If you ever watch a movie with me, the pleasure or displeasure of watching a movie with me, man, it's I get into so much stuff. There's so many times I want to pause a movie and just like look at look at a scene and like lay out everything that's happening and going on and all of the choices and all that other kind of stuff. It makes me happy.
Yeah, me too. Although I will say, if it's my first time watching a movie, I can't do that. I gotta watch the whole movie. I can't be pausing. But if I've seen the movie before, that is one of my favorite things to do. Is just talk about here's what's happening and what we're getting out of it, and comment on specific choices. Lighting, camera angles, dialogue, all that stuff. Or on the flip side, making fun of bad movies. It's always a good
God,
time too.
I have to make fun of bad movies. Speaking of making fun of bad movies, I do want to give a shout out to the podcast Mom Can't Cook, where they review the Disney Channel original movies, like the movies that they made
Oh
for Disney
man.
Channel.
DComs.
Yeah, DComs, man. They talk about reviewing bad movies. Like we can be honest, a lot of those are bad movies. They go into them, but it's a lot of fun. So if you want to listen to two people talking very specifically about movies that are very ridiculous and kind of not very good, but also remind you of your childhood, go listen to that. They're great. I've been listening to them for a few years now. They've done just about every single Disney Channel movie under the sun.
There's a lot of those. That's impressive.
They've been doing it for a long time.
Well, if we're shouting out people that we've listened to or watched recently who talk about bad movies, I very recently discovered a YouTube channel. I think her channel's called Talking Hallmark. She does the same thing with Hallmark movies. It's not quite as in depth. She's more talking about the story than like specific stuff, but it is very amusing, especially if you don't want to watch a Hallmark movie but you want to experience the Hallmarkness of the movie.
And so plugging those specifically on this episode because again, they talk a lot about story craft and they talk a lot about the decisions and sometimes the ridiculousness of said decisions and the absolute
Mm-hmm.
absurdity of why characters are doing this. No, she would not break up with her big city lawyer boyfriend who's making more money than the entire income capita of the city that she wants to
Yeah.
move to. She would never do that.
Or how you're supposed to root for the main character who typically is just not a good person until the very end, and then they change. But it's like, okay, the whole movie, I know I'm supposed to be rooting for this person, but I just do not like them, and that's almost always the case.
Or the fact that so and so's family in this Disney Channel movie is just awful. They're just terrible. Like, no wonder they act like this. Yeah, like dad is incompetent and mom is aloof. Of course, trouble is happening.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Oh. The amount of suspending disbelief you have to do with especially like DComs, where you just have to accept that this is the Disney World, and so this stuff makes sense. It's so beautiful. It's so wonderful. It's such an amazing little genre of movies.
It really is, especially those early 2000s ones, man. Crazy. Um, to, to get us out of that, is there anything with writing that you wanted to talk about this week?
Uh, Not really. So I haven't had a whole ton of time since the last time we recorded, because that was like a few days ago. We're still trying to get the backlog going, which we're almost there. So we should be going to once a week recording fairly soon. I've mostly just been pondering the next chapter of the book, because essentially it's turning into a series of vignettes. Each chapter is a different vignette where it looks at a different part of what's happening, and you get different clues and things like that. So I'm just trying to figure out how exactly I want to frame the arc of that specific chapter, but that's mostly just a mental exercise.
Yeah, I should be diving into more of my writing soon, hopefully, as we downshift to recording once a week with a completed backlog. I'm hoping to be able to get more into the second book that I'm writing. I technically have 3 or 4 books in the works, but focusing more specifically on one for the time being while I'm just kind of doing submissions for the one that's already finished.
Yeah. Well, we keep plugging away. It's not always glamorous. It's not always fast, but consistency is far more important than anything else.
Absolutely. I think it's about time to wrap this one up. Tim, do the plugs this week.
Ah, okay. You were so professional last week when you did it. Okay. Let me see. So, if you want to get in contact with us, you can email us at ctwriteforyourlife@gmail.com, or shoot us a comment underneath wherever you're listening to this podcast. We do have socials now. I believe it's either Write for Your Life or CT Write for Your Life. Those links will be in the description. Go over there, give us a follow, give us a like, give us a share, do whatever you want to do. We're continuing to try to build this. It's always slow going, especially at first. Any little bit helps. If you have comments, suggestions, anything like that, let us know. And finally, and probably most importantly, Caleb's Substack, which is where we get all of the readings that we do on this podcast, cparkgreen at substack.com. Go over there, subscribe, give him a like on those. You get to read news stories every Wednesday morning at 5:30, which is the same time this podcast comes out. They're very good. I think that's it.
I think so.
Yes.
And with that, keep writing, keep listening, keep being inspired.